Good morning, everybody. We are coming off a weekend of a lot of unrest, a lot of upset. And before I bring Dave Secker on to join the conversation this morning, I just want to acknowledge what's happening in the world and to say that this is a tennis platform. I definitely have my views on what's going on in the world and am happy to discuss them in my private social media or via email or something that's not Parenting Aces connected. But I did want to just say for those of you tuning in who are impacted, which in my opinion, it's every single one of us, that, you know, I didn't want it to go without saying that I acknowledge what's happening in the world and am doing my part with that on a personal level, and that Parenting Aces will remain a tennis platform. So with that said, I want to bring Dave Secker on. And Dave, how are you? Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's a gorgeous day here in Southern California, so no complaints.
I know that skyline.
Yeah.
I know that background.
We used to be neighbors, apparently. Well, not neighbors, but you used to live down the road from where I'm living now. And now you're in North Carolina at NC State as the assistant women's coach there. Tell us a little bit about your role at NC State.
So I'm the assistant coach here for Simon Ncaa, who's the head coach. Simon was actually my college coach many, many moons ago back at Armstrong Atlantic State, which doesn't exist anymore in Georgia. I played for Simon. I was his graduate assistant. I was his assistant. And then right when my wife and I first got married, we moved to San Clemente, just down the road from you. And I worked 4.5 years for Jimmy Johnson and Mahmoud at Vantage Tennis Academy in Irvine, the racket club of Irvine.
Amazing. And that's, literally right up the road from me. And it's just such a small world and so interesting to me how tennis comes full circle, how you're now coaching, with your former coach. And I just think that's so cool. And it just speaks to what a small world the tennis world is. Where did you grow up? Where did you come from to find your way to Georgia?
I'm from West London, Hayes, which is hop, skip, and throw from Heathrow Airport. For anybody who's ever been into London, certainly tennis world is from West London in the UK. I grew up there. Right at the end of my high school, I spent a couple of years in Barcelona. At the end of the 90s, early 2000s, Barcelona was really the place to be for European tennis. It was kind of the hotspot. And I spent 2 years there. I was very fortunate to get some help from the federation and some other people to practice there. Simon recruited me to Armstrong, which is a pretty high-level Division II school at the time. And things just kind of went from there. I can't tell you how we got to San Clemente. My wife had a friend in San Diego, and we looked at barns. And a guy I'd met playing satellites years before that, Brandon Fallon, was the director at Vantage. And I actually just asked him, what's it like to live there? And he said, I can bring you here. So we just got married and we were looking to move around a little bit and get a different experience at the end of our school time. And we ended up there.
And now you're back in the South and coaching women. How is that compared to your experience as a male tennis player?
Yeah, my coaching started for me at Armstrong. I was a graduate assistant. In Division II, you coach men and women's programs. So I'd always done both. I'd never really had a preference, but I'd done both. So I guess having that on the resume helps. It kind of gives you a perspective from both sides. When I went to Advantage, I certainly didn't start out as a women's coach, but as positions evolved there, and we grew pretty quickly at Advantage. We kind of had the need for one person to kind of take reins with the women's, the girls, one person to kind of run the boys, and we had it got big quickly. And I kind of ended up in the role with the girls and college placement and things like that. So just by coincidence, Simon, who was coaching both teams at Armstrong, when he moved to NC State, it was on the women's side. So things kind of lined up like that. It was not by design, but it just kind of evolved that way.
Gotcha. And I want to just say to those of you watching, if you have any questions, you can type them in the comments, and I'm looking right at them and can pose the questions to Dave as we continue our conversation. One of your roles at Advantage Tennis Academy, Dave, was parent education. And I just want to say the way you and I connected was last week. UTR put on a 2-day series of seminars or webinars for coaches, for college coaches. I happened to join in. I know Colette Lewis of Zoo Tennis sat in on some of them as well. And I was in one of your sessions. And one of the things that you were talking about was how important it is for parents to understand the junior development process and what their role is along with their own child, but also with the coach. And so I would love for you to kind of expand on that in this platform.
Yeah, I think, right now is a good example. I think people are being forced to share information in different ways, like these webinars we've seen from UTR, USTA. I know I've done some public ones, but they're also doing college ones, and it's a really good time to share information. And one of the things, I think probably appealing things for Advantage when they hired me was I had a perspective on recruiting and college, and obviously a network of people I could call with questions. And one of the things that became very evident to me, even in Southern California, where there's such a rich tennis history, the players and the parents initially, they're looking for tennis information, right? Stroke development, skill development, physical development. But more and more, as the stress of recruiting becomes greater, what the parents are really looking for is recruiting guidance and answering the questions that they can't necessarily get their hands on. And a lot of that it's not inside information, but it's understanding, what does this kind of response mean? How proactive should I be? What sort of information do people want? And that information is just as valuable, because the thing that shocked me, at Armstrong, we recruited international players. A Division II school, we had an international roster. We had one very good American, but it was a 99.9% international recruiting. We would see the players when they arrived. We knew their results. We knew their clubs. We knew people who knew us, etc. But with the American process, it's such a longer process. There's so much more stress involved. And it was the first time I'd ever seen the impact that the stress had both on the player and their performances and the parents.
Right.
And it was really shocking to me at first and if a coach can take the edge off that with some information, or look, let me deal with this piece, or let me deal with the college coach, that was kind of the value in what like places like Advantage, and you see IMG on a bigger scale and things like this. That's kind of what people are investing in as well.
Well, but the flip side of that, and something that I talk about a lot on Parenting Aces, is the value of having the player, him or herself, drive the recruiting process and take responsibility for it, right? And recently I had my son on this platform, and we talked a little bit about his college recruiting. He talked about it in more depth on another podcast that he did. But one of the perks of allowing your child to own the process is if they make a decision that doesn't end up working out, it's on them, and they take ownership of that, right? And they learn from that experience, and then they figure out how to make it better the next time around. And so that's something that, in my opinion, is really valuable. And I hesitate to advise parents to rely on the junior coach to take on too much of the recruiting process, but at the same time, the parents shouldn't be taking it on either. And I think it's really interesting what you said about watching parents feel stressed about the process and how that manifests in terms of not only their relationship to the sport, but the relationship with their child.
Oh, yeah, I've seen it almost rip families apart, the stress of it. And the reality is it's an arms race, right? Because if one parent, let's say the parent has a tennis background or a sports background, and they understand recruiting, the other parent who doesn't have that background automatically feels at a disadvantage, and they get defensive or upset about it. So they'll do literally anything they can do to try and bridge the gap. And that's where you get this, like you said, these kind of panic decisions, or kids not being as involved as they maybe were before. We've also seen the change in the rules in the recent years where they're not seniors taking these conversations, taking these visits. kids are committing before being able to even officially visit now. And that's changed the way things have gone. And so now this information has become more of a commodity. Anytime it becomes a commodity, it becomes for sale, right?
Sure.
And that's part of what's happening, I think, a lot. It's not as organic as it was. So it's become a kind of a capitalist venture, right, in recruiting. And you see the rise of the agencies in Europe, these huge recruiting services. It's an industry of itself now, and I think America is starting to see that as well.
Yeah. And, there are some great people out there assisting families. And I don't want anybody to get the feeling that I'm anti recruiting agencies, because in some situations, it is a really valuable asset to have those folks in your corner helping you out. But at the same time, I think as much as the player, him or herself, can drive the process, that's the best possible scenario. And I want to hear, as a coach, your perspective on, can you tell when the player is in charge versus when the parent is in charge?
I think as coaches, we try to identify that early from a college point of view. You have to understand who's making the decision, and you have to understand what is the basis of the decision. So I can tell you when we first came to NC State, Division II, really, you can throw out what we did recruiting-wise in Division I. It's just a totally different world.
Right.
So we came to Division I, and we had an idea of, this is how Division I recruiting works. And the reality is what we were basically doing was exactly the same as what everybody else was doing. And it didn't work for what we were trying to do. So we had to figure out very quickly what sort of player is going, or parent is going to like this school or this type of program. And certainly if the player's driving it, it's better. But not every 16-year-old knows what they're supposed to be asking, or they know really what they want. A lot of times you find them telling you what they think you want to hear. And some of that is maturity, some of that is fear, and some of that is just that they're coached to do that. Coaches, you see, how many articles do you see in a day? 5 things you should say to a college coach, or
right.
Right. And it's just misinformation sometimes. Some of it's good, but you're right. I mean, it's gotten more complex. I think is the easiest way to say it is in the last few years, as things have changed, it's got a lot more complicated. And I think there's also a lot more recruiters out there now in the college world. I think recruiting there was a status quo for a long time in college tennis. And I think the status quo has really been shaken up in the last 10 years. So now, whereas a kid, let's say from Southern California, would get recruited by 5 to 10 schools, now it could be 25 to 30 schools. And that conversation gets a lot more complex when that happens. And it's more stress at the end of the day for the family, for the player.
Sure. And a lot of these schools that are expressing interest may not have the budget for official visits where they can pay for the player to come. So then the financial burden gets shifted to the family to decide, if they can't pay for me to come for an official visit, but this is a place I'm really interested in looking at, am I willing to shell out the money to take a trip to go visit that school, right?
Well, we had this gap for 2 years where players could communicate with college coaches and commit, but they couldn't take an official visit.
Right.
Now the rules have lined up again. I think the NCAA did a good job, just common sense backtracking that, okay, official visits have to match up with communication. Mm-hmm. But you had a generation there, I think it was 2 or 3 years, where basically the parents were forced to take the unofficial visit. Because the college coach could still put the pressure on and saying, well, we want you, but you're saying you need to do a visit. Well, you're going to have to get on the plane and do the visit.
Well, and, we want a decision in a week, but we can't afford to fly you out, right? Yep. Even now that they can take the official visits, if the program doesn't have the money to pay for the official visit, the family pays for the official visit. And herein lies a lot of the challenge with college and recruiting is the rules are continually changing. It's very difficult to keep up to speed. And I continue to tell people, if you have questions about your child's particular situation, call the NCAA Eligibility Center. Those folks are the ones that know the rules, the current rules, and they are really, really helpful. The phone number is on the NCAA website. Just, type in the search bar Eligibility Center, and I found them to be incredibly helpful, way more helpful than pretty much anybody else that I spoke with. Because let's face it, Dave, every child's recruiting experience is different.
No.
It's not even, you can't even say every family's experience is different. Every child within the family's experience is different.
Well, I mean, just look at our team. I mean, we have 9 girls on our team last year. I mean, every single one is a unique case. Mm-hmm. There's no model for this is the process they went through to get to NC State. There literally are 9 different processes for our 9 players.
Right. And what's going to happen now with COVID-19? I mean, listen, we all wish we had a crystal ball right now and could tell what's going to happen with football and what's going to happen with returning to campus and, longer term, what's going to happen with spring sports like tennis. But we don't have that crystal ball. So you're on the inside. What are you hearing?
What I think is going to happen is this year is going to be a dynamic year. We're going to react as things happen. And then I think you're going to see the ramifications of this year starting after going into the next year. I think at the end of the day, it's driven by football.
Right.
Football is the priority, and it should be, because it's what creates sports like us.
And by create, you mean fund.
The revenue and the fund, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's what important.
Funds the sports, yes.
And it is different between levels. So like at a Power 5 level like us, we're basically a self-sustaining athletic department, versus a mid-major, which is driven by student fees. It is a very different model. Mm-hmm. So like you can see what, for example, in your area with, let's say, San Diego State,
right.
if they don't function in the fall, the conversation is very different when you have a student fee-driven model like theirs, because if the school is not functioning properly or there's a budget crisis, you have to justify those student fees. Where at a Power 5 level like ours, if student fees are a smaller portion of the revenue and we actually maybe give back more to the school in tickets and resources than they give us in student fees, it's kind of self-sufficient. It is different. I think this year it's going to be literally a month by month, week by week. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we don't have an answer.
Yeah.
And the other thing as well, it's very specific to location.
Right.
For example, we're in the ACC. We go from Miami to Notre Dame. Miami can have a rule, we can have a rule, Syracuse can have a rule, and it's totally different. I think this year was just going to be literally, I don't think we're going to know about our ACC season properly until we get to the spring. And obviously we have the benefit of being a spring sport. How does that affect recruiting? Just from a basic numbers standpoint, there's less scholarships for the next 3 years for incoming players than there've ever been. Because this year we have an expanded roster, right? So we had 2 seniors. This year we're allowed to expand our roster to 10. But after this year, those 2...
But that's a school-by-school decision, right?
School-by-school decision, yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I think you're seeing on the women's side, the large majority of players exercising that option and schools exercising that option like we have. Mm-hmm. But obviously, the freshmen this year, sophomores and juniors, they also get the right to exercise an extra year. But there's no scholarship expansion. So let's say our juniors, for example, have expressed to us that they would like to do the extra year, and obviously we'd like to have them back. Well, that means, let's say for 2021, instead of us recruiting 3 scholarships, now we're recruiting 0 potentially. Or maybe one of our players goes off to a grad school in a different program. We're recruiting 1.
Right.
So the pool has shrunken for the 2020 run recruit, the 22 recruit, and the 23 recruit, and that's going to have ramifications.
Yeah, and it's a ripple effect, right? I mean, it impacts every level of the game. And especially I think right now where junior competition has been shut down for such a long period of time. People don't know, our rankings, what's happening with rankings, what's happening with UTR, what's happening with tennisrecruiting.net. How is that going to impact junior competition and seeding and getting into tournaments once USTA opens its tournaments back up, which they're leaving to the sections now. Once the ITF opens junior competition back up, UTR is right there saying, hey, come use us. We're here. We want to help you get junior competition jump started again in your community. And that's what you guys are doing, right? You're working with them. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
To me, the appeal with UTR, the relationship is prior people who've worked in the same circles. Most people know, obviously I played for Simon, but I worked for Jimmy Johnson, who was trained by Steve Smith. Actually, you're not far from Koto de Casa, which is the Mecca for most of us, where Vic Braden ran his program. That's where a lot of us, our information comes out of. But that's the UTR connection. A person who worked with Steve works at UTR right now. And he said we started putting on events last fall. Our men's team have done it at a bigger level, and they've done it pretty effectively. But trying to create extra events, and part of it, as most things do, it started selfishly. We wanted a couple of extra matches for our girls outside of our dates of competition locally, which were cheap. But also because there was a strong footprint here with junior tennis, we wanted to provide events so my philosophy is match count. I don't like the idea of a parent spending money on an entry fee and their kid might go 0-1 or the dreaded 1-1.
Right.
Out. So I tried.
Or 0-2.
0-2. Yeah, that's the word, right? So we tried to create compass draw events. You pay your entry fee, I will give you 4 matches. Mm-hmm. And that was the goal here. We did it so what we did is we did a 2-tiered event purely based on UTR to take any politics out of it. What we said to local teams and local academies were, if you come here, I guarantee you will not play your teammate or your academy mate in the event unless it's the semis or the finals. And if it's a backdraw thing, I will simply switch it. I just want people to feel comfortable playing matches and playing matches where it counts towards their UTR. And the thing I like about UTR is the platform is so flexible to do that.
Right.
You can create these events.
And you're talking about the event platform. So let me just clarify for people that aren't familiar with UTR. There's the rating piece of UTR, Universal Tennis Rating, where every match that your child plays may or may not, depending on, will count toward their rating. And I won't get into the specifics of that. And you can go to myutr.com and read about how the algorithm works and how the matches get counted and all of that. So that's one side of it. But the other side of it is they have created a platform for events to be held as UTR events. And those events, then the matches count toward the player's rating. So, it's a very different process than holding a USTA tournament, for example, or an ITF tournament. There's not the sanctioning process, the long application process and all of that. It's much more kind of entrepreneurial, allowing the tournament director to do all sorts of creative things with the event, but still have it fall within the parameters of counting towards the player's rating on UTR.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'll give credit to Randy Pate at LTP. They do a big job. He said to me, I need an event before national indoors where we get guaranteed indoor courts if we need them. So I can do that. Yeah, that's easy. And I talked to UTR and they said, okay, so we created 2 16 draws, top 16 UTRs going 1 draw. There was a little bit of prize money. I think it was 100 for the winner. It was 200 for the winner, 100 for the finalist. And if you made the semis, you got your entry fee back. $50 and another 16 draw for the next 16 UTRs. And the draws were mixes of college players. There was a couple of ex-college grads, some junior players, and they just played. Right. All under one roof in our indoor courts. It actually rained the whole weekend, so we played indoors. And it was great. I mean, we just showed up and played. And I was a roaming referee. I had two girls of mine who weren't playing it run the desk, and there was no real. People just showed up and played, and the vibe was very different to a junior tournament.
Right. And this is what we're seeing happening around the country right now, right? These UTR events are being held at clubs, at public parks, on college campuses, wherever people have access to courts. Well, maybe not so much on the college campuses right now, but these events are being, created and promoted, and they're local. They don't require a hotel stay. They don't require driving long distances. You come, you play your matches, you go home, sleep in your bed, you come back the next day, play some more matches, go home, sleep in your bed. Okay. So it's an inexpensive, non-travel way for your kid to get back into competition and hopefully compete against people that they might not normally get to play against.
And it changes the vibe. I mean, when you go up against each other so much, all of a sudden you play in a college player, you have a totally different experience. Even if they're the same level as the player you play all the time, it's a very, very different experience. There's none of the less of the politics and kind of the confrontational stuff, because it's just not going to happen in an environment where you have older people around. And
and there are different rules around referees and officials and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And certainly you guys, that are putting on these events promote good sportsmanship and, good behavior and all of that. But there's a big difference in the feel at a UTR event versus a USTA or ITF event.
I think it's more the idea of just playing to play.
Right.
I'm here to play the match. I'm not here because I have to get to a certain round to qualify or I have to get a certain number of points. I'm here to play, and let's just play. And I think that simplifies it a little bit. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean there's not going to be some angst or, rivalries and things like that. But certainly, not going to say we didn't have a couple of issues, but the conversation is pretty easy with me. If a parent said something on the side, I say, look, this is not that type of event.
Yeah.
And if they say something, I say, well, then you can leave. It's okay. I'm not worried about it. There's not going to be an appeals process or anything like this.
Right. And there's no penalty for leaving.
It's just not that type of event. Right. We want you to play.
Right.
That's it. Right. I understand there's going to be close calls. If you have an issue with that, I'll come here and help. There's no politics here. And I think it is a different vibe. It is a different vibe for sure.
Yeah. So, Dave, talk about, because there's a lot of conversation around how important is your UTR when it comes to getting recruited. And I think that's added a level of stress to this whole process that, before we just worried about USTA ranking, ITF ranking, and tennis recruiting stars, right? Now we've got UTR in the mix too. So there's a fourth component to stress over and manage and monitor and all of that. But that's not UTR's purpose. That's not their goal, to have people checking every day to see what's happening with their rating.
And it's been a unintended consequence, right? Is the stress of the UTR. And
sure.
I saw it firsthand. I had a kid retire in probably the third or fourth round of the back draw at a certain score. And I didn't think of anything of it. I wrote it down, and then a parent came up to me later and said, "You know what they just did?" I said, what did they just do? They said they got to a certain number of games and then they dropped out. I said, well, why would they do that? I said, because otherwise their UTR would have gone down. I can remember specifically at ATA one day, this was when they did a correction on the algorithm and everybody dropped by like 0.4.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Social media went nuts.
A girl who's, I won't say her name, but she's going to play at a very big school next year, walked past me crying. I said, well, what's wrong, sir? She was 13 probably at the time. My UTR just went down 0.4. So well, did you lose a bunch of matches? And she said, no, they changed the number. I said, well, okay. But yeah, it's a new thing. How aware are college coaches of it? Honestly, if I'm being honest, the conversation started with UTR. I told them, number one, they annoyed me because they made it easier for college coaches to recruit internationally, which is where I thought we end up. I mean, obviously I'm European. I felt like we have an advantage there, but now UTR makes it so easy. So I used to give him a hard time about that. I still believe that the no-ad scoring affects UTR, because you see kids come to college and it drops. The matches are instantly closer in no-ad scoring format because you don't have to win 2 points in a row to win a game. I think UTR is a good tool from a ratings point of view, comparing within groups. I think if you compare college to college, it's a good tool. Junior to junior, it's a good tool. ITF to ITF, it's a good tool. I think the struggle a little bit is between groups. We see sometimes where a kid who plays more pro events in the summer versus, let's say, the summer circuit, their UTR will inflate a little bit because they're in a pool with only players with higher ones. But certainly college coaches use it a lot. Us personally, my biggest use for the rating is to find information on one page. It's like you said, in the old days, if I got the name of a player or somebody emailed me, I'd look up their tennis recruiting. Then I'd go to their ITF page and I'd look that up and maybe look at their biographical information there as well. It's always good for birthdays. And then, I don't know, if they're from another country, maybe I have to go to that country, something else's website. Now with UTR, it's all on one page. And I think that's a huge tool for recruiting. I think it's something they're going to explore more as time goes on. But
you're still looking at a variety of
personally
data points. It's not just the UTR that you're considering, even though you're going to their site for the information.
Yeah, I mean, most people who know Simon and I, we're a little bit on the math side of the world. We're going a little bit beyond, that initial number, because the initial number can be a little bit misleading sometimes. You can see a kid who's a high 10 UTR who's maybe never beaten anybody above a 10.5. But it's a good tool to get information quickly.
Right.
I think that's how I would describe it, and it's certainly something I definitely use. But it's a good entry point. I think it's the nicest way I could say it.
Okay. And now with junior competitions starting to, come back on the scene, kids are getting back out. Certainly we're seeing some kind of non-sanctioned pro events. And of course, an article just came out speculating what's going to happen with the US Open now. And I mean, there's just so much unknown. What does your day-to-day recruiting duty look like right now in the midst of all this craziness?
Zoom. We've totally moved virtually. It's actually been kind of refreshing. Like, we've been doing these recruiting calls with Simon, myself, the player, sometimes a parent, sometimes a coach, sometimes we had a European one the other day where it was the recruiting agency, and we've had to totally change our presentation. And for us, that we always felt like the official visits were a big deal, so we had to find a way to move the information we presented that way online, and our school's done a good job of they quickly produced some resources for us to use. We got
sorry to interrupt, but can you get current players on the Zoom call with a recruit?
Yeah, so we just passed legislation like 2 weeks ago. We got the okay, and so we did it. We haven't done all of them at one time, but we try and pick specific ones, maybe if it's regional or they have a connection to that person. But that's a huge part, because like for us, we always feel like our girls are one of the biggest recruiting tools we have, right? The girls are going to tell them the truth. They're going to answer the questions. They're going to ask the girls questions they're not going to ask us. The girls can talk more about the day-to-day. So what we've actually done is we've done it a bit where the girls are on with us, and a little bit we've tried to allow them a format where they have a little bit of time without us, even on a Zoom call, where they can just ask some different types of questions. But it's different. We'll announce probably in the next 48 hours. We literally just signed a player, and the entire process. Now, we'd seen a play in person before, but we'd signed, and the entire process from the start of communication to signing today was online, was done virtually. It's different, yeah, for sure.
And I will say, I know when my son was going through it, that meeting the team, the guys on the team for him, was a huge component to his decision making. And so since the kids can't go visit the campuses right now, I think it's even more important than ever for the prospective student athletes to reach out to current team members via social media or however they choose to connect, and have really honest conversations with the people that are on the team already. Ask the questions that you might not feel comfortable asking the coaches, because it really does tell you a lot. I want to just say, Pippa Lane, hey Pippa, just typed in a question. How about a low 11 dropping to a mid 10 first year in college? ITF juniors are typically overrated. It happens over and over. What do you have to say about that, Dave?
Yeah, we've been tracking it. Pippa is a Steve Smither as well. He can tell some stories.
Steve Smither, I like that.
Yes, it's true. We've been tracking it. I have a spreadsheet. I did a study on it for 2 years. We took the. You ever seen the top 10 newcomers list in college? We have a preseason ranking in college, and then they rank the top 10 newcomers. So we took their UTRs in September, December, March, and May, and we just tracked it over time. And we did that for 2 recruiting classes in a row, and we were finding an average drop of about 0.5, 0.6. UTR acknowledged it. I think it was less this year. I think the average drop was about 0.3. So they felt like they'd made a little bit of a better correction with that. But
what is it attributed to?
Many factors. I mean, my argument was the scoring.
The no ad
does make matches closer, and the disparity of the match is a factor in calculating UTR. I think that obviously if you dominate your age group, but then you're in an open age group, obviously you're probably going to come down a little bit as well. In juniors, you're playing against juniors. There's biological differences there. You get into college, you might be playing someone 3-4 years older than you, 5 years older than you in some cases. That's a factor. But for sure, we're seeing that drop, and college coaches are aware of the drop. We factor that. I mean, we tell players straight out, look, your UTR will drop when you come here. And sometimes you get some backlash from home about that. Just kids say, well, she was an 11.2, and now you tell me she's doing great, and she's a 10.6. So, well, yeah, but she's a real 10.6 now in our world. But.
Well, and here's the thing. Once you're in college, really how important is your UTR? I mean, once you're on campus and you're playing for a coach, the coach isn't doing the lineup based on what the players' UTRs are. The coach is doing the lineup.
There might be. Now, is it important? Our full championships were seeded on UTR.
Is that right?
Oracle is an investor in UTR, and Oracle has obviously been a huge contributor. So the Oracle Fall Championships were seeded on UTR. So it is slightly important.
All right. Well, so I stand corrected. Yeah. That does make a difference. But if everybody's UTR is being impacted the same way, it's
we're aware of it. I mean, it's an accepted norm that when you change, as I was saying, when you change groups from junior to college, it changes.
Right. All right. Well, let's get back to these junior tournaments, because that's really what I want to focus on. And why should parents be looking at these UTR events and seeking them out for their children, especially right now?
So the way we've looked at it moving forward is, so I can talk about at a college level, we're on a regional travel schedule for the next year. So whereas we're not going to get on the plane and just go play whatever's fall event, let's go to Texas and play a fall event or whatever. I would assume parents in the same way are feeling some pressure financially, not all, but some, and they might also feel uncomfortable traveling, right? Like you don't know necessarily the risks. I mean, I think traveling is low risk according to the CDC right now, but still there's that trepidation right now about it. So,
well, there's a difference between getting on an airplane and then getting on an airplane and having to stay in a hotel and having to eat all your meals out, right?
Well, imagine San Diego. Let's say hard courts in San Diego or Kalamazoo, right? It's different. If you're going and traveling to groups of people, eating out, being in hotels, there's definitely, you're going to exclude some people from that right now. Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to do, and a lot of it depends on how things evolve on campus, is could we create a series of events locally? Could the Triangle schools and let's say Wake Forest or Kerry Tennis Park and these facilities we have here, could we just create a mini circuit here to supplement some college matches that we've lost where our players can play, to supplement the juniors. Let's say they've lost some opportunities to play, and everybody's just kind of in, and we're sharing facilities and we're sharing some resources, and say, all right, we're all in a little bit of a struggle here. If we could create a pool where costs are covered and no one's really losing out, I think that would be that's the way we're trying to approach it right now.
Well, but I'm hearing from some parents who are saying, it's not fair for these national events to take place because it's going to punish the people who don't feel comfortable traveling. And yes, that is true. If you don't feel comfortable traveling, your child isn't going to play that event. Obviously, they're going to miss out on the opportunity to earn those ranking points. But let's keep the big picture in mind here, right? This is about development. It is about a player getting better every time they step foot on the tennis court. They don't have to go to an L1 USTA event in order to develop and get better. They can do that just as well locally. And in fact, they may even be at an advantage by staying local and playing, because maybe they're going to have exposure to some local tennis coaches at the collegiate level that they didn't know before or weren't on their radar before.
Well, I think that's the question right now. And obviously, if you speak to Dave Fish, he has strong views on this. Can we go back to remembering that things used to be done locally? And I can name off a few examples of people who live 5 minutes from you, who never went further east than the state of Nevada and played in the Pac-12. Mm-hmm. Now, Southern California has its advantages. That might not be true for the kid who's growing up in Iowa, but there is certainly evidence still that it can be done locally, it can be done regionally without stepping on a plane and still get access to the higher level. We're very wealthy in terms of tennis here in this area where we could do it. So right. If we could provide a circuit where players don't feel like they're losing out and parents don't quite feel as much pressure, I think we have a bit of a responsibility to try and do that a little bit. The other part of that is recruiting. UTR approached us about these UTR showcases. Mm-hmm. Well, I like the idea and it's a good thing. My response was to them that, look, if I put on a recruiting event, the people who are going to sign up and pay are not necessarily the people who I'm going to recruit, because we recruit a certain pool of players. Let's say that sort of pool of players isn't necessarily going to show up to our event. So what we've talked about is we're aware of the suffering of the mid-majors right now. We lost ECU tennis program, which was a very good tennis program here locally. And we played them every year. I sent out an email in the summer to like the ECUs, the Charlottes, Appalachian States, all the good mid-majors in the area, and said, if I hosted a recruiting event on our campus and I took care of the costs and the entries and all this, and then one of the days was a UTR verified tournament where you could come and meet the kids, see them play, and then have your recruiting interaction with them afterwards, would you be interested? And the goal there was, like you're saying, with the parent not spending money, could the mid-major spend less money?
Right.
And come and see the same kid.
Right.
Because there's some very good mid-majors in our area who don't have the budget to get on the plane like we do. And I think we have a little bit of responsibility at the higher level right now, or not the higher level, but the financially bigger level, to help them a little bit if we can as well.
I love hearing you say that. I do.
Well, we're a big school here, and our provost gave a really good talk a few years ago to us. We're lucky we have guest speakers in our staff meeting. He said the goal of this school is very simple: solve the needs of the people right now. So we started as a farm school. It was an agricultural school. Now we're a tech school, and that's the needs of this state right now. And I think this area right now, it doesn't change with sports. If we can solve some of these problems with events, then they do benefit us as well.
Sure.
If we do community events or tournaments for our players, it helps us massively. But if we can help some of the people who are struggling around us a little bit as well, it will come back later on.
Well, I'm going to let us finish on that positive note, because I really love that message, and I'm really happy to hear that NC State is standing by that, especially right now when everybody is struggling. And, I just want to encourage people to reach out to you, Dave, and take a look at what you're doing at NC State from the parent side, from the player side, from the coaches side as well. If people want to reach out to you, where should they email, call? What's your
Call,
best?
email. I'm easy to reach.
Okay. Do you want to share your email address?
It's an easy one, actually. It's djsecker@ncsu.edu.
Perfect.
So my initials just fall nicely on that one. Simon's one is a little tougher.
Well, thank you. And thanks so much for coming on and chatting with us and sharing your thoughts. As I said, I loved what you were saying during the webinar last week at UTR, and really wanted to have the opportunity to have others hear your voice and hear what you're up to.
And thank you for providing this kind of platform for people. I think it's important right now, and it's a good time for people to have these conversations. And the technology's there now. There's nothing that we have no more excuses not to do these things, right?
Exactly. I think everybody's getting zoomed out, but hopefully they're not Facebook Lived out yet. I don't know. We'll see. Well, have a great week, and thanks for doing this. And for those of you watching, we're doing this again on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific with Scott Hambach, and we'll be talking a little bit more in depth about what's happening with junior comp and USTA in the southern section. Southern section typically drives what happens around the country. So a lot of times, the other sections are looking at Southern and also looking at Florida and Southern California to kind of make decisions about what they're going to do. So it should be a really interesting call too.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Dave. And
Thank you,
thanks
Lisa.
y'all for tuning in. We'll see you on Wednesday. Bye.